So we've got Paul McCabe from Roland, who's online. So Paul, I wonder if you could just briefly say your name and where you're from, just so we can check the levels, make sure we're all good.
Sure. Paul McCabe, originally from Vancouver, Canada, and now situated in near Los Angeles, California.
Great, thank you. And then we have Hazel Savage. So again, just briefly say hello. And
thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name's Hazel Savage. I was the CEO and co-founder of Musiio, an AI tech startup, and I currently work at SoundCloud.
Great, thank you. And Daisy, who you've met before, but for the online audience, please reintroduce yourself.
Sure, my name is Daisy Rosenblum. I'm originally from New York, but now based in Vancouver at UBC.
Yeah, good.
Oh, and I guess I'm a linguist who works with communities to do language revitalization. Yeah.
And then CJ?
I'm CJ Carr from Boston, USA, from the band Dadabots.
Yes, excellent. Okay, so in this second panel, yeah, like I said, we're thinking about the future of music making and really thinking about the values and opportunities of AI in the future of music making. And because of the workshop topic, we want you to talk a little towards the responsible and AI, ethical uses of AI in that space. So we'll go through 5-minute introductions each where you talk about your practice and where you're from and where you see the future first. So if you could give a 5-minute introduction about you and your use of AI in music making, or how you're related to AI in music making, or using AI for audio, let's say, as well. And what you think is actually the important parts of that kind of aspect. So, like, what might be the future of the area that you're working in? So, I will go around this way. So, I'll start with Hazel first.
Thank you so much. Okay, so for anyone in the room who doesn't know me, in 2018, I was living in Singapore and I started an AI company with my co-founder. We came out of the incubator Entrepreneur First, which is in London as well, but I did it in Singapore. And we basically built what we were calling at the time an AI that could listen to music. I've been working in the music industry for about 18 years. So like my first ever job was I used to work at HMV on Oxford Street. So about 15 to, it's now a Sports Direct, I think. Right. But it used to be a massive record store, biggest record store in London. And I used to work in the classical music department in the basement. And that was like my first ever job, minimum wage, stacking shelves. And it used to be that when you put the CDs on the shelf on a Sunday night after the shop was shut, because all the CDs, the new releases, were available for sale on Monday morning at 9 a.m. For anyone in the room who is under 40, not me, you may not remember that was how the music industry used to work. You used to have to queue up at 9 a.m. if you wanted to buy a CD. Now you can release music 24/7 across platforms, global time differences, you name it. And I used to be, because I was the person putting the CDs on the shelves, there was like 5 or 6 a week kind of CD singles. And then I remember in 2018 when I was starting a company, Spotify had put out a press release saying that they had 60,000 songs a day being uploaded to their platform. And I was like, hang on, how do you go from like 5 a week to 60,000 a day and not have a problem? So that was kind of the initial thing that I'd identified, and that was just purely from having worked in a record store back when I was 21, right the way up to streaming services being the predominant mode of listening. So really just identifying that problem in the space, and then we raised money, $2 million, built the company to profitability, and then in 2022 sold Musiio to SoundCloud, who were one of our biggest customers at the time. Hence why I work at SoundCloud now. I'm the sort of bizarre founder that just kind of hangs around in a much bigger corporation going, I don't really have to do visa issues or HR challenges. I don't have to do payroll anymore. That's kind of weird. So I just kind of, I work for SoundCloud now, and I get to do great things like this and come along to these types of events, which is fantastic. And really for anyone who's interested in Musiio more directly or the technology, we still take on clients, we still sell the product. Musiio.com still exists, musiio.com. And we have a couple of demos that you can play with on the website. So one in particular, the tag demo, you can drop in any SoundCloud or YouTube link, we'll fingerprint the track in real time, and we'll give you back 20 to 30 pieces of metadata. So genre, key, BPM, whether there's a vocal or not, whether auto-tune's been used or not, anything that you might want to kind of find out about about songs. And we do that currently, that process, that tagging, we do it to the tune of about 5 million tracks a day globally across all of our clients. So adding metadata to music, now that there are 60,000, 100,000 songs a day, makes it infinitely more searchable. You can playlist it easier, you can find talent easier, and a platform like SoundCloud has 375 million tracks. So it's a pretty large data set to be working with. So we're definitely what I used to define as being in the sort of assistive AI space, as separate from generative. We're not kind of creating new compositions. We're not sort of training a model to be able to generate new output. We're just assigning data to existing output. So that's kind of where we used to separate ourselves, but that was back in 2018. The world's a lot more complicated place since then. And we also did a lot of work trying to think about how to build our AI ethically, because you need to be careful when you're building data sets. Say, for example, when you're training, our AI can identify 84 different genres, but say you want to train it to identify rock music. So you need 2,000 songs that typify the rock music sound that you're looking for. Now, if you've accidentally or intentionally got 2,000 songs that all have a male vocalist, you can be accidentally training your AI that if and when it sees a male vocal, then it will assign the tag rock, which is incorrect. It also may hear a song that has everything else that's identical or similar features, but with a female vocal, and then it would auto not assign that as a rock song. So you need to make sure that in some ways your data sets are representative and you're not teaching it to learn the same thing. But that's a slightly bigger category. But ballpark, that's what I do, and that's where I got.
Well, thanks very much. And we'll hand over to Paul next. Same sort of thing, brief 5-minute introduction, Paul, about yourself and AI music and what you see as the future.
You bet, thank you. And I'm the one of these things is not like the other in the room, clearly here, but I'll get used to this soon enough. Yeah, Paul McCabe, I'm with Roland Corporation. Going way back in the time machine, I've been a musician all of my life. I've worked in the musical instrument industry for most of my life, a good chunk of it anyway, over 40 years, and I've been with Roland for 32 years now, 25 of that in Canada, and then more recently based near Los Angeles in Orange County, California. Electronic music has always been a passion of mine, so everything that's associated with that, including sound design and production, has been interesting for me. I had the privilege of getting a chance to work with the instrument maker that I loved back in the early 90s, and have been with Roland ever since. I've worked in a wide variety of roles, from almost all of them have been closely related to product. When I came, just before coming to Los Angeles, I was the CEO of our Canadian company for about 9 years. I was given the great opportunity of taking over the leadership of the company right as the Lehman Brothers crisis started. So I had to learn a lot about a lot really quickly, but the company stayed profitable through that. So I consider that a win. In 2016, the company had been taken from a publicly traded company in Japan through the 90s and early 2000s to privately held, as many companies in the music industry and the entertainment space. We were struggling to get our footing again after the Lehman Brothers shock, and so we were taken private by a private equity firm out of Seattle. And as part of that, I was given the opportunity to move into a global role and start to build a global marketing organization, and that brought me to Los Angeles. I then spent a few years building a global customer experience group, and then eventually, more recently, moved into research and development, where now I lead a department in the company called Roland Future Design Lab. And our focus is on the next 5 to 50 years of music making. So I'm very interested in participating in this conversation today and learning from everybody. Early in the Roland Future Design Lab's life, we were thinking about, and this was 2022, we were thinking about what Roland's roadmap would be for generative AI specifically. We've done some work in AI and machine learning before in some of our products and experiences. generative AI was something that was new to our consideration, and so we were thinking about what our place would be alongside generative AI. And it occurred to me and a few others in the company at that time that we really, before we leaned too much into our planning, we really needed some guidelines around what we would and wouldn't do, should and shouldn't do, and thus began a project inside the company focused on establishing some values and some principles. And that work continued through the end of 2022. Of course, end of 2022, OpenAI brought ChatGPT to life on the public stage, and that was the big inflection point for most of the public. And that accelerated our work on trying to get our principles finished off. I was at the Microsoft Build conference in Seattle in April or May of the next year, and that was kind of the big coming out party for conversational AI in the consumer electronics space. And so I had a chance to talk with many companies, small and large, that were partners of Microsoft, that were somewhere along the same continuum that we were in road mapping of what our place would be with generative AI. But what I also saw was that companies were starting to make public declarations of their values around generative AI, including Microsoft. I think Microsoft probably had more than one set of values that they published, and so that shifted my thinking. And I came back to Roland and said, Roland, we're fortunate that we've cultivated a real wonderful stable of loyal fans over half a century of making electronic musical instruments, and I feel that we've got a responsibility to take a bit of a leadership role here. And whatever our values are, let's make sure that we share those publicly so that people can really understand where we stand with this, and hopefully we can have a positive influence on others in the industry as well. Making the long story longer, fast forward to August, Universal Music Group announced a collaboration with YouTube around making some new creator tools for the YouTube platform. And as part of that, they declared 3 very high-level values or principles around generative AI, their do's and don'ts. And it occurred to me at that time, strength in numbers. If we really want to have the influence that we hope we can have, maybe the better approach is, rather than having lots of smaller companies in the musical instrument industry eventually reach a point where they're publishing what hopefully are fairly aligned values across the industry. Well, what if we move now and tried to get others on board? And what if we looked outside of musical instruments, and what if we looked at the entire music industry as well? And so I'd read this blog post that included some great thought leadership from Sir Lucian Grange, and I thought, let's do what any entrepreneurial young lad will do. Let's try and contact Sir Lucian Grange. First thing I did was went to ChatGPT and said, how do I write an email to a knight? Didn't know how you do that. Wrote the email, made up addresses. I didn't have an address. I sent 4 emails, 3 of them bounced right away, and 1 disappeared. The next morning, actually had a reply from Sir Lucian's EA and said, we'd love to talk. And that brought us together. We recognized that the 2 companies were actually aligned in more ways than we had imagined. And so we started to collaborate first on what became the principles for music creation with AI. We published those earlier this year at aiformusic.info. But our intention was always, going back to our kind of original thoughts, this isn't something that we wanted to own. This is something that we wanted to basically establish and guide as necessary. But we were hoping that other industry members would step up, and maybe we would solve the problem for them by being a little further advanced in our work around this in establishing these principles. Where we stand now is that we've got over 70 companies supporting AI for music, and we're in discussion with, I'm sure, half that number again, that are in various different stages of reconciling with the principles. And Roland, interestingly enough, went from somebody who was not a brand that was not really in the discussion of generative AI and music to now being quite central to a lot of the conversation, at least in the music making realm, the musical instrument realm. So that's my little on-ramp.
Great.
And look forward to participating.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And next Daisy, so you've introduced your work this morning, but please recap it for the online audience, but also maybe talk about how you see the future of this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm at UBC and I'm trained as a linguist, but I now work collaboratively with communities that are doing language reclamation, mostly indigenous communities in North America. And I have one very long-term partnership, over about 20 years, which has allowed me to be immersed in all of the kinds of data creation and management and thinking that go into working with a body of sound data. I started out sitting with elders who speak Kwakwala, recording them, transcribing the language. It has 42 consonants, so twice as many as English, and translating it, and then also thinking about what kinds of annotation and categories are relevant, what kinds of metadata are relevant as well, in order to be able to manage this data, and then also to store it well. And also the cultural protocols around that kind of knowledge and and what it represents for people. For me as an outsider, it's not mine to share. And so that's a kind of alternative perspective on the sort of baseline assumption that a lot of us might have, that open is better. So we may not assume that necessarily in all cases. I would say that the other thing is that there's been a trajectory for me from doing that kind of detailed, being immersed kind of in listening and annotating and being kind of immersed in the structure of this data and learning what that structure is, to myself stepping back because community members are actually doing that work themselves and that it is better for them to be doing that work. And for me, the move towards using NLP, using machine learning methods and models has come out of trying to find ways to use technology to make communities' lives easier, and especially to give people more time, to give learners and teachers who want to spend their time, learning from their grandparents, more access to the things that they need in order to be able to learn the language. So the other piece of this is that these are communities that have been they've received anthropologists and linguists since Franz Boas first showed up at the end of the 19th century. And so there are huge kind of amounts of records that have been created but taken and stored elsewhere that they don't have. And one of the opportunities that is connected to doing some of the work that involves actually building small data sets is not just about creating data, which I've done a lot of, but also about recovering legacy data. And in recovering legacy data, there's a whole necessary workflow that makes it accessible, starting with digitization. But then once a document is digitized, making it machine readable. Once an audio file has been digitized, the wax cylinders are now also being digitized in completely optical ways without even touching them. They don't disintegrate. Then transcribing it. Can we use automatic speech recognition to at least add efficiency to that workflow? Maybe can we get to 80% accuracy recognition of characters and prediction of those characters in order to then human correct it and build your data set that way. And then finally, when you're assembling all of these materials, how do you store them? How do you organize them? And are there ways that we can create new tools that actually are responsive to community needs, which are not structured according to sort of the assumptions that are made about how to collect things, how to organize them, what the metadata is, that we've always made. And in terms of looking at the future, I would say there are a couple of things that I am sort of an evangelist for. So one of them is the benefit of working with small, carefully curated data sets. I think that actually is highly transferable and has been pushing. I see examples everywhere of people talking about the value of smaller data sets in certain contexts and purpose-built, the value of that for various kinds of artificial intelligence systems. And I think that there's also a parallel, I would say, like a metaphorical parallel. I think, I was talking this morning about collaborating with communities. I'm an outsider. And when, I think that for a lot of us as researchers or as industry folks or whatever, there's a lot of anxiety about asking people for permission. Or even just thinking about collaborating with communities, that in itself it could be a rabbit hole. How long does it take? Who are the people that you talk to? How much money do I need to allocate for this piece of the process? How do you actually do that? Is there one person that you talk to, or do you talk to the government, the band office? Who gives permission? So those questions are, they're very present, and they create a lot of anxiety, and that there's a lot of work to be done to unpack those and start to figure out how to do that well. But there are also huge benefits to doing work that is collaborative. There are things that are only possible and will only be possible for projects that are generating their technologies in that way, in response to and alongside community requests and community guidance, and through a kind of agile, iterative workflow. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. Hey, CJ, about 5 minutes.
Hey, I'm CJ. My earliest memory of life is looking at Hendrix burn his guitar on fire on stage and like feedback with the amps. And that had this imprint on my mind, that spirit that has never left me. And I learned guitar and played in a Hendrix cover band with my dad. And when I was 11, won a Hendrix Sound Alike contest. Just freaking loved music and like breaking music also. Then I wanted to make video games, so I taught myself programming. And in high school, I just got into like more and more extreme music. Like in my area, Boston, mathcore, metalcore, death metal was a huge thing. And just like, can we make the BPMs faster? Can we put more notes in? Can we make the songs even shorter? Can we scream louder? Can the mosh pits be even more dangerous? That kind of attitude. And that attitude brought me into electronic music. And in my area, breakcore was a big thing, where we're doing the same attitude with like electronic music. We go 200 BPM. We cram a bunch of samples from like 100 different songs into one track. And so I learned how to make that with Ableton. And then I met my buddy Zach. And we were interns at Berklee College of Music. And Zach and I formed the band, which is now Dadabots. This was 12 years ago. And we were messing with granular synthesizers. And granular, that sounds very glitchy. Like, can we make this more organic? Luckily, like right next door at the MIT Media Lab, there's all this research going on in machine learning, like very, very early stuff. So we just absorbed it, not even as grad students, just as musicians wanting to push music to somewhere new and extreme. And we discovered this machine learning library for making neural nets, Theano. And for us, in the computer science textbook, machine learning is sort of this like last chapter that's like the hard mode, the like necrophagist song that's like impossible to play. And then in the machine learning textbook, neural nets were this last chapter, the like impossible to play necrophagist song, which was so enticing. So we just like helped each other, raise each other up to really learn it. And we did. We nailed it. We lucked out because the very, very earliest neural synthesis models, like sample RNN, which is like stacked LSTM models, we're talking 2016, 2017, they were really, really good at generating death metal. Like, not good at reggae and electronic music, techno, but death metal, it nailed it. Reasons being, because the timbre range is very narrow. And so we set up a never-ending YouTube live stream that just creates death metal forever and ever and ever and ever. It's called Relentless Doppelganger. It's been running nonstop for 5 years. And yeah, there's that. And we're like, wow, this is really, really great. Like, I mean, we'd both been in touring bands. We're actually kind of sick of all the humans in those bands, you know? And we were making electronic music, but you know, there's something not very organic about all this like glitchy digital sounding stuff. Like, so like AI felt like very, very natural process for us. And we also discovered that it's way easier to collaborate with other artists as a technologist. If I were to cold email one of my favorite artists and be like, "Hey, I'm a bassist. You know, can I be your next record?" They're like, "Get out of here." You're not gonna answer the email. But if you're like, "Hey, I'm working on this latest AI model. What do you think?" And very easy to nab a collaboration. And we've collaborated with some of the great artists in this room, even Reaps One over here, world famous beatboxer of the UK, and we trained Reaps One a neural net on his own beatboxing, which he uses to battle. Yeah, and so we're having a lot of fun collaborating with artists and touring now with live AI. And so right now we're doing this spin on DJing called prompt jockeys, where as a DJ, you're playing music from your own collection, but with prompt jockeys, songs don't even exist yet. One thing I'd like to say about prompt jockeys is that instead of playing music from my collection, I'm actually prompting from the collection. And in doing that, I can make these fusions. I can fuse genres that have never been fused before. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about all the modes of expression that AI has opened up. And finally, my day job, I'm at Harmony with Julian over there, putting out open source code research and models. And then I love that because it aligns with my values of open source. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll have a time for people in the audience online and in person to ask questions. And before that, we'll just start with a few brief questions directly to the panel. So one thing that came up, which isn't in the questions that we'd prepared, but Daisy mentioned about cultural protocols around collection. And it came up, ethics came up also in Paul's talking about the principles of music creation with AI, the AI for music principles. And you also mentioned ethics in your Musiio as well, Musicio, right? So I'm interested in we think about the ethics of creating music, but what about those cultural protocols? How does that relate to the music making? Like thinking about the different cultures or the ways where the music comes from. I'll start with you, if that's right.
Yeah, because I was building a VC-funded startup, sometimes those questions are really easy to answer because it's whoever will pay for the product.
Okay.
And that would solve a lot of issues for us.
Yeah.
So, you know, but as an example, when we first started in 2018, our original genre classifier could identify 21 genres. And that's how we built it. We were like, okay, what have you got? Rock, pop, classical, metal. And so we built an AI model that could identify these 21 genres. And very, very quickly, a lot of our clients started saying to us, like, that's not enough. You know, we've got a large database of Indian music. We've got a large database of folk music. And the way our AI worked is if it didn't recognize the genre, because we hadn't trained it to recognize it, it would just default to tagging like the closest thing, which looks and is incorrect. So that's kind of a bad product experience. So we very quickly realized we needed to improve our our genre classifier, and we went from 21 genres to 84. So version 3 has 84 genres, and most of those tend to work for most of the companies that we work for. To the point where most people can use it, it represents what they need. We did do some speculative builds at times where we were working with we were working with a company in China, for example, and they really wanted to know, could the AI tell the difference between somebody singing in Mandarin versus somebody singing in English? So we built a prototype, and the answer is yes, you can train an AI to do that. But then they were like, we're just going to build it ourselves. Don't worry about it. We've got a lot of good engineers over here. And we were like, that's fair. But that was kind of a fun project to work on regardless. But because there was no client for the product, we never put it into production. And the same with, we would do a lot of like subgenre research. Like we spec'd out and we built the test data for if we wanted to generate a classifier that could identify the top 20 subgenres of music in India. And again, like we had a couple of clients that were interested, but again, nobody that was really wanting to move forward. So the research still exists, the product can do it, but in a nice, straightforward way, in a startup way, we build what people would pay for.
Right, so let me ask Paul about that then. Coming from the Roland perspective, is there an element with that cultural protocols coming into the ethics that you're working with? Is it your responsibility as a company to actually address those questions, or is it simply a business case? Oh, he's muted. Is he muted?
Ability as a company to help address that in the same way that we had a responsibility, although it was very atypical of Roland in our history to take a stand as we've done with the principles for music creation with AI. I just have to say that our thinking is not particularly advanced here. I think relating to this, what I think about in this topic is one of the projects that we've got that we're just starting with the Universal Music Group is something called the Music Provenance Project. And I think about where that might have some benefits in respecting culture, but also preserving culture through music as well. And really simply, the Music Provenance Project is thinking about where most digital rights management solutions kind of start with a finished something. Is there some advantage to considering provenance where Roland lives in the music creation stage, which is right at the very beginning? And if we, rather than think about applying some sort of a provenance framework to something that's finished, if we think about working with the core assets and the core elements of music and thinking about provenance there and allowing those to travel up. And our goal is to surrender whatever we develop with the Universal Music Group to the C2PA and make a proposal to them. But I also think that may have that idea of working with the elements of music on a much more granular level, if that might also bring some support to identifying and preserving cultural elements in music and attributing them appropriately as well. The other thing that we think about, of course, is the accessibility of these tools to different cultures, particularly in emerging markets as well. And that's, we're doing a lot of work right now on how we can bring these music making and music preservation technologies to cultures that are not as, or I guess markets that are not as developed, not as advanced as the mature markets. So yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Great, thank you. And Daisy, so this comes from your question, but it sounds like provenance. Would that be something important in the way that you use or collect? Or
that is an aspect. So there would be provenance, and it depends if you're talking about provenance like for something that's never left the community versus something that has been taken and then stored elsewhere and is being returned. Yes. Very likely, actually. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think the question of genre is actually kind of a productive microcosm of some of these questions about cultural protocol. So, for example, I mean, cultural protocol is going to be contingent on the context. And so it is, one of the challenges of trying to approach this, like from an industry perspective is, how do you deal with that kind of variation, and how would you kind of define the practices differently in relation to all of these different parameters. So genre is kind of one of those places where, cultural protocol is really available as something that you can tap into and use to make distinctions. So there are songs that are, like if I'm thinking about the Kwakwakwa community that I work with, there are songs that are children's songs, that are love songs that kind of anybody can sing or teach or learn or compose. And then there are also songs that are owned by families, that are connected to stories and also to whole sets of kind of performance regalia that happens in a ceremonial context. And those songs are owned, and people, they are in places where they're public as a result of anthropological and ethnographic work. But they're not necessarily songs that people feel should be public, or that, it may be okay that you can hear it, but you should not sing it.
Yeah.
So that's that's kind of one question where the genre actually will tell you, if you're able to have that kind of knowledge in relation to certain kinds of music, you can, kind of how to deal with it and how to use it, whether it's accessible for a data set. And I think the other thing is that, if you wanted to interact with some of these songs that are owned, and if you want to think about using them in a data set, first of all, you need to know that that's a cultural practice, right? Like that's not something that is familiar from our own contexts, and they're kind of like family means it kind of goes back several generations and into the future in a different way than we think about family. So knowing that is something that allows you to make better decisions. I think that the sort of bad news piece of that is that it requires a kind of investment of time and maybe tapping into aerial expertise. If you're working with specific regions of India and trying to understand how to manage a data set there.
CJ, any thoughts on provenance? Is it something you...
My provenance? Actually, maybe on like a cultural protocol question. The primary cultural protocol of music is love. And we heard this in Andre's talk. In the Philippines, the subgenre of harana is there to serenade your lover. And even before humans, like birds, why do they sing? Same reason. And who here has made a mixtape for their partner that they're dating, right? Exactly, right? And now we're entering this stage of like AI where you can synthesize things very special for one person. Maybe her favorite artist is Bjork, but she's from Indonesia, so she grew up with Balinese gamelan. We're like, you know what? Here's Bjork gamelan. Hell yeah, right? And it's like personal. Like it doesn't even have to be shared outside of that context. And maybe we end up getting married, and I like East Coast mathcore, and she likes like Bjork gamelan, and we want to hear the fusion of those genres at our wedding.
Yeah. I want to hear that. Yeah.
Right. And if you look at the history of music, it's the history of cultural fusions. And is there like any more poignant example of that than here in the UK of the Jamaican diaspora, where we get from reggae to dub, dancehall, jungle, drum and bass, grime, garage, dubstep, like, wow, what an explosion of love. And so, AI allows us to make fusions of things that, and like very quickly. And so I'm excited for its role in helping us fall in love.
Great, that's a beautiful thing to say. So I totally agree with you, by the way. Any questions from the audience in the room? We've got a few. Okay, we've got a couple of questions. We have a microphone. Oh, this is going to be complicated. Okay. So who have we got first? Anna's going to help me. Whoop. Okay, so first question. Make the question quick, and then we'll go to your second.
Super quick. As you were talking, CJ, I kind of couldn't help but shed a little tear because in that process, I kind of thought, yes, I want all of that, but I want to make that. I don't want something else to make that for me. So I wonder if that, if that struck the same sort of chord in other people as well. But I think like that is what makes music quintessentially human and only human. And the reason why the Jamaican diaspora in the UK was so important it was because people making that music could integrate themselves within a larger sort of ecosystem. And if that was replaced by something giving the finished product, it wouldn't have the same, the same cultural significance. So just wanted to share that. But I was wondering if that crossed your mind and what your thoughts about this.
Sure.
Well,
yeah, I think there's a spectrum there, and even in my own music production, I mean, like what it spits out, isn't really quite there. But a lot of times, like it's prototypes of like, never thought to like stick it together this way, and it sort of leads me on a path, not completely all the way.
Anybody else on the panel want to respond to that? Yeah. Paul?
Yeah, I just I was going to say.
And then Paul after,
sorry,
yeah.
go ahead, Paul.
All of it, yeah. Needless to say, from the Roland perspective, we're music to our ears when we talk about the actual human making of music. But, I think what we see here is, and as a Canadian, I'm a glass half full person, and we see a lot of opportunity here. As we know that there are common pain points to people coming into the world of music making. I don't have the gift, I don't have the time, I don't have the money. And we think about what generative AI and natural language processing might do to softening that on-ramp into music making and challenging those preconceived notions of gift, time, money, and so on. And what I think about is I've got 4 kids, 2 daughters that are both photographers whose inroad to DSLR photography was Instagram and TikTok. And there they started with a very strong focus on the output of photography. They were really interested in process. And so they had all these shortcuts through the filters and algorithms that Instagram would provide to the output, and really enjoyed that. But then through their journeys became fascinated with kind of looping back around and understanding more about how that was done and wanting to take more control of that. And so, we think about that same potential opportunity in music making where we've got research bodies like Musiio that are talking about a groundswell of the consumer creator. Millions and millions of consumer creators that are coming into music making with a focus on the output. And through prompting a very quick path to the output, and we think about what is that journey from consumer creator to musician. And from our perspective, there's a massive chasm. There are probably intermediate steps in there as well. But I think about that Instagram experience of my daughters and the ability to wrap back around and actually delve into the process of music making and enjoy that.
Okay, thank you. Hazel?
Yeah, I was just going to say I play guitar. Got my first guitar when I was 13, and so I used to play in an all-girl punk band in London when I was working at the record store. Nice. And I know how it feels to write a song on the guitar. And I've played with apps and various tools where I've used AI to generate a song. It doesn't feel like the same thing from a creative process. Like when I did the AI app, I was like, oh yeah, there's a song at the end. I don't really feel like I did anything. Like, because also as well, I think the bad examples of generative AI, you can't write bad music. And a lot of music is not great. It's like I actually invested in a generative AI company. And one of the things I was really passionate is if you're not good at the tools, you can still create really awful music. And I feel like it's important to not just create like a flawless, I'm pressing the screen, but I'm not really doing anything. But at the same time, I guess to build on what Paul said, to me, I think eventually it might just be considered like two different instruments. Like in the same way when the sort of the synth first came around and people were like, that's not real music, you have to play a real piano. But now we just respect that there's piano music and there's synth music. So I'm kind of hopeful that we'll get to a point where we'll have both. Because to me it feels, as a musician, it feels different.
Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I relate to that as well, just on the sort of the maker side, not making music, but making other kinds of things. So I started out with a BFA in drawing and sculpture, so I'm very into materiality and process and the kinds of the way that it feels to make something, in an embodied way versus with a computer is very different. And I kind of I look at it as a design problem for these technical tools and these technologies. Can we design them in a way that's an invitation for someone to also have that experience, not to lose it? Can we design a process that may be designed for discomfort or uncertainty, to kind of create something that is that's going to prompt the human part of us and the embodied part of us to actually do more. So that's where I'm thinking.
Yeah. And then second question, design for uncertainty. Yeah. Anna at the front. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, because you've sort of partially taken it out. It's the CJ one, really. I mean, the problem is that if you look at reggae music and you try to factor in that there's that migration of peoples across the world to, post-Second World War, the lack of welcoming, therefore you have to create your own structures. Your music does not feature in the charts because it's being sold through other kinds of retail outlets, which means it doesn't make it into the general national chart. We already know this because if the Bhangra, if the Pakistani and the Indian communities actually, if their music was sold through Woolworths and HMV, then the charts in the UK would look very different from the way that they look. And so therefore, reggae as a product of resistance, Babylon, how does that factor into what is essentially AI as Babylon? Because you end up in that kind of Guy Debord Situationist International, the recuperation, whereby even where you have moments of resistance, it is co-opted by capitalism and by large kind of machinic forces that essentially absorb it and then repackage it and send it back to the public. And then, so how does that fit into where you are? Because it's, when you look at ideas of where all of this has come from, it is not just merely something that is just lying around to just be picked up and played with. It is something far more entwined within communities, around lives, resistance to oppression.
So
and
it's
all of that disappears
it's a very big
when
question.
you do what you say you do.
So a very, very big question. You're going to have to give a very short answer, and then we have the time for one more answer from question from online. So, how do you respond to this very big question in a very small way?
We should, talk to me after.
My other part of my job is the Music Research Unit at Westminster. So we've got an exhibition that's running at the moment at the British Library called Beyond the Baseline, right? Like everything that is not just to do with deep subs. So you might want to go and have a look at that as well.
Anybody else want to respond to this point?
Well, I think, my point would be I probably fall on the side of I don't think AI companies should be using music that they have not secured the rights to, because that money is not flowing back to the original creators. I'd like to think that there's a sort of utopia where even if it's music that comes from oppression or it's come from revolution or resistance, if those people opt in and are happy for their music to train an AI model and they understand the revenue that they're going to get from it, that should be up to them. But I think at the minute, what we see with some of the big generative AI companies, and I think this is what pisses people off, is they've raised 125 million, 10 million, 50 million, and all of that lives in tech, and all of that is probably going to flow to the corporate existing music industry. And are those people ever going to see it? I think that's a problem, and I currently am against generative AI that uses material that it does not have the rights to train on. But that's my personal opinion, not the company I work for.
But I would also just add that that's kind of an inevitability with the big corporate tech, because it is they are black box systems where they're not telling us where those data sets come from, and they also have just in the past year, every single one of them is figuring out how to protect and hoard the data that they own and create, and also get as much as they can for free everywhere else. And so, I mean, that's why I am sort of very interested in making sure that there are more people who understand how those models work, how those systems work, and can also create them. Or at least work with other people to create them as a site of resistance.
So Paul, do you want to jump in just to respond as well?
Just really quickly, just a brief thought on this. I'm going back to a brief mention I made of the Music Provenance Project, and the driver here, of course, is around commercial infrastructure, but a few things have been said during this discussion today that have me thinking a lot more about this dimension of cultural appropriateness as well. And a lot more thought needs to be given to this, but I'm wondering if some of these same mechanisms might be applied to signaling and helping to protect this dimension of cultural appropriateness as well.
Great, thank you. So almost at the end, we've got a question online, and I'm going to ask the panel to answer very quickly, like 1 minute or something, right? Super quick. So the question is from Jessica Edwards. It is, have you seen the extra attention driven by the generative AI boom as a net positive for music creation? So actually, has it had a positive effect on music creation, the recent generative AI boom?
I think the music industry as a global whole is worth $20 billion a year. I think that the benefit to the entire industry is if we grow that top line number rather than try and slice the pie in a different way. So I do think that AI tools and potentially generative AI have the ability to increase the total size of the industry. And I think we're seeing that in real time, how the money will flow back to the artists, hopefully. But yeah, I having built and sold an AI company, would come down on the side of generally positive, but we watch it in real time.
Okay. Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say that from a commercial perspective, no, we haven't been able to quantify a growth in the music industry, certainly from our perspective in the industry as yet. But what I will say is that the public consciousness around the value of human creativity, the value of intellectual property, human created works, the value of being able to recognize between artificially created and human created works, the discussion around what is inspiration and what is plagiarism. I think all of this discussion rising to the top where it is right now is extraordinarily valuable.
Thank you. Daisy?
I mean, I'm not really equipped to answer that, but I would just say, like, I feel like we're just in the middle of something that's changing so quickly. It's really hard to know.
Yeah, it's difficult to know.
Yeah, it's hard to see what's happening right now in front of us, but that's where the answer is.
So CJ's in the middle of what's happening right now. What do you think? Has it been positive?
Well, the music industry as an economic force as we know it hasn't been around for very long. It's a blip in the span of human history. And so I almost like music is just more meaningful than the industry. And I think what's important is how we communicate and relate to each other. And like media synthesis produces a lot of new economic problems, but like I think in the long run it just becomes normal as new generations of children grow up into it as normal. This is how we communicate with each other. And I think it, in the long run, expands the way that we relate to each other.
Correct.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's a beautiful way to end the panel. Thank you. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for their excellent time. And thank you to everybody who joined online. So we're just going to finish up and close 5 minutes.